Welcome to this explainer. Imagine spending 23 grueling years building something that honestly seemed completely impossible. I'm talking about transforming a fractured, blood-feuding Arabian peninsula into a unified single state bound by faith and law. Now, imagine watching that monumental achievement threaten to just completely unravel. In less than a month, that is exactly the terrifying existential crisis that hit the early Islamic State. And today, we're going to see exactly how they survived it. Okay, let's dive into this. Think about the lifetime work of the Prophet Muhammad. 23 years of slow, painstaking unification. Now contrast that with the shocking aftermath of his passing. Within a single month, practically the entire Arabian Peninsula erupted into this sudden, massive collapse. It's like the map literally turned red overnight. We're not just talking about a minor political disturbance here. This was a total systemic shock to the core. To really understand the absolute nightmare the new caliph Abu Bakr woke up to, you have to realize this wasn't just one unified rebel army. Not at all. It was a massive, multi-front crucible. You had false prophets popping up claiming divine revelation, you had outright apostates completely renouncing the faith, and then you had this massive third group. These were people who still prayed, they still claimed to be Muslims, but they absolutely refused to pay zakat, the obligatory charity, to the central authority. Because of all this, Medina was completely and utterly isolated. So the crucial point is understanding exactly why that third group was so insanely dangerous. You see, zakat isn't just some optional tip jar. It is an obligatory wealth-based charity that is practically and theologically inseparable from Islamic prayer. Some of these tribes, they argue that their zakat was just a personal tribute, something paid only to the Prophet while he was alive. But here's the thing. Separating prayer from zakat meant the unified law of Islam was suddenly up for negotiation. It would all just be based on tribal convenience, and that was a massive red line. And that brings us to an incredible stance taken by Abu Bakr. Now, he was famous for being a very gentle, tender-hearted man. He was known to weep during prayer. In fact, even senior companions like Umar ibn al-Khattab initially advised him to kind of chill out, to negotiate, just accept their prayers and let the zakat issue slide for now while they dealt with the outright apostates. But Abu Bakr, he transformed into an absolute rock. He completely refused to compromise the institutional integrity of the faith. He literally stated he would fight them even over a piece of rope used to tie a camel if they would held it. That is how unyielding he was. Because of that uncompromising stance, Medina had to go to war. And we're talking a multi-front war against some incredibly powerful, charismatic figures. You had men like Tulayha, claiming prophethood for himself. You had Sajah, a woman who actually gathered Christian Arab tribes behind her. Down in Yemen, there was Al-Aswad al-Ansi. And then, probably the most terrifying of all, you had Musaylama. He managed to rally the massive, hugely wealthy Banu Hanifa tribe. Every single one of these leaders used claims of prophethood or just deep tribal loyalties to completely fracture the newly unified state. Let's move to and see how this builds, because the resistance to all this chaos actually started from the ground up, way before Medina's central armies even marched. Take Yemen with Al-Aswad, for example. His rebellion actually kicked off months before the Prophet passed away. But local Muslims, they didn't just sit around waiting for Medina to send an army. They organized their own underground resistance and actually assassinated Al-Aswad the very day before the Prophet's death. It's fascinating, right? It proved that despite the massive fractures happening everywhere, there were still these deep, active pockets of loyal resistance. Now, local resistance was amazing, but it definitely wasn't enough to save the entire state. Abu Bakr needed a coordinated response, and honestly, he executed an absolute masterclass in crisis management. He didn't just lump everyone into one massive army. Instead, he dispatched 11 separate military commanders to systematically extinguish the flames spreading across Arabia. And the tip of the spear, the brilliant tactician Khalid ibn al-Walid. Khalid immediately went to work. He decisively crushed Tulayha's forces at Buzaka and quickly restored order to Central Arabia. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer terror it captures in a single number, 40,000. So after cleaning up Central Arabia, Khalid was sent straight to the Yamama region to face Musaylima, a man known as Al-Kadhab, or the Great Liar. And Musaylima wasn't just some charismatic public speaker. Not even close. He was backed by 40,000 heavily armed, fiercely loyal fighters from the Banu Hanifa tribe. Make no mistake, this was going to be the ultimate test for the young Islamic State. The Battle of Yamama that followed was, for lack of a better term, an absolute bloodbath. Initially, things looked really bad. Khalid's forces were actually pushed back, and several veteran companions from the Prophet's era were killed right at the start. It was looking grim. But then, in this desperate rally, they invoked their faith and managed to turn the tide. Just pure, sheer determination forced Musailima's massive army to retreat. They fell back into this highly fortified agricultural compound, and that set the stage for the final, daring, incredibly desperate breach of its walls. That walled compound? It became known as Hadiqat al-Maut, literally the Garden of Death. Once the Muslims finally breached those walls, the whole thing just devolved into brutal, close-quarters combat. But right in the middle of all this chaotic violence, there's this incredible micro-story of redemption. Wahshi ibn Harb was in the fray. Now, years earlier, as an enemy of Islam, he was the man who had killed the Prophet's beloved uncle, Hamza. But now, looking to redeem that dark past, Wahshi actually found Musailima in the chaos and struck him down. With that single blow, he effectively decapitated the entire rebellion. And this brilliantly illustrates the immense, tragic duality of this victory. On one hand, over 10,000 rebel fighters fell, which entirely neutralized the greatest military threat out there. But on the other hand, the Muslims paid a truly devastating, irreplaceable price. They didn't just lose soldiers that day, they lost their scholars. They lost very men who literally carried the foundational text of the faith in their hearts. 70. That is the estimated number of Hafaz killed in this single battle. These were companions who had memorized the entire Quran verbatim directly from the Prophet. You really have to understand the existential panic this caused. See, the Quran wasn't fully compiled into a single physical book at this time. It lived entirely in the memories of these men. So when they bled out in the dirt of Yamama, parts of the primary source code of Islam were in genuine, immediate danger of just disappearing forever. Which brings us to the ultimate so what of this whole explainer. It's a direct, undeniable chain of cause and effect. The devastating loss of those Hafaz at Yamana absolutely terrifies Omar. He realizes right then and there that relying solely on oral tradition, it's just no longer safe. He urgently proposes writing it all down. Abu Bakr agrees, and he directs a brilliant scholar named Zayd ibn Thabit to compile it. Meaning, the physical, written Quran that billions of Muslims read today, it directly exists because of the specific blood spilled in the Garden of Death. We can extract some incredibly powerful, truly timeless lessons from all this. Just think about the decisive leadership it took to stand firm on principle, how doing what's right is sometimes actually safer than compromising. Or the intellectual humility of a giant like Umar, who was willing to completely change his mind when Abu Bakr made a better argument. Then there's the beautiful possibility of redemption, like we saw with Wahshi. But above all, it teaches us about institutional integrity. It's the understanding that if you start letting people pick and choose the rules just for convenience, the whole system crumbles. This isn't just some obscure, dusty chapter of history. By the end of his incredibly brief caliphate, Abu Bakr had completely extinguished the Riddah Wars. He fully restored a unified Arabian Peninsula. And what's absolutely critical to grasp here is that without this uncompromising, bloody victory, there is no unified state, period. And without that unified state, the massive, world-altering Islamic expansions into the Persian and Byzantine empires that happened just a few years later, they would have been literally impossible. Abu Bakr essentially saved the launchpad. So I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. How do history's darkest, most desperate crucibles lay the absolute foundation for its greatest triumphs? The Riddah Wars started as an absolute nightmare of fragmentation and death. There's no sugarcoating it. Yet, it ended by cementing the institutional integrity of Islam, preserving its holy text forever, and setting the stage for a civilization that would quite literally change the globe. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how the foundations of our world were forged in the fires of the past.